Hello and welcome to another episode of Stokemeter. And we are pleased to have a friend from across the pond, Thomas Vosper. He is the CEO and co-founder of IO3, and we'll get to that in a minute. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me from all the way here in a little bit sunny London.
I can't believe it. It's sunny in London.
Sun shines every now and then. Yeah. It's a little bit warm.
You know, I love that place. I remember the first time I was there, I was in Piccadilly Circus and just kicking it over there. And oh my goodness, you talk about the London immersion. It was fantastic.
I can't believe you come all the way to London and you go and stand in front of basically a big Coca-Cola sign in neon lights.
That's pretty much it. I was over at the Meridian right there in that circle. It was very fun. But and the other thing too is I'm just going to go through it. I mean, we're so off track, but that's okay. The fact that you're a guitarist, I mean, if you're listening to it, you're robbing yourself, because Thomas has some pretty incredible guitars in his background over there. So again, a fantastic individual, fantastic guitars, and I will say a fantastic person too. So welcome again to the show.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump right into this. One of the ways that we connected was through common friends. And I was so taken by your story, because I was looking at how you began a company at 40 years old. And most people, when they get to 40, they're like, you know, I'm pretty set in my ways. I'm pretty good in the golden handcuffs and the corporation, so on and so forth. And not only, well, I liked how you had phrased it. You became a redundancy. I just say when we're over here, it's just we got laid off, man. But with that, you were right in the middle of the COVID, if I remember the story correctly. And then you were able to begin a company, IO3. Just wondering if you could take us through how that happened. What was the background on that, and how did it come about?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the businesses that are founded that end up being successful, they do tend to be founded by individuals who are in their 40s, but for full transparency, it doesn't always feel like that every single day. It's always hard work, as exciting as it is running a startup. But look, I'm an e-commerce guy, right? So I've been in e-commerce for 14 or 15 years. About half of that time was spent in the UK arm of Amazon, back when they were about 6 of us on the marketplace team, launching all the categories that you kind of take for granted now exist on that platform. I moved over to another well-known retailer called Tesco, who are a grocery business, looking to build their platform, and then found myself working for a price comparison startup for a number of years. And that was really my kind of first experience away from corporate life, working at a slightly more scrappy startup. Unfortunately, with startups, you always get an exit in the end, and it's not always the one that you want. And yeah, about 2 weeks before the UK went into official lockdown for the first time in the onset of COVID, I found myself working away at a conference when I received a group WhatsApp message saying, hey guys, the company's basically run out of money and you're all being made redundant, which actually is it is probably a nicer way of saying what was effectively laid off, and like, off you go, guys. And so, with that wealth of experience, and I suppose partly a desire, partly necessity, partly right timing, good judgment, and good people around me, that was the opportunity to turn a negative into a positive and say, well, look, what would happen if I take all of that experience, and with the team I have around me and the friends and support I have, what would happen if I kind of went out on my own to try and create my own company. And yeah, just 5 days after receiving that that WhatsApp message, we incorporated IL-3.
That is amazing. Well, and the other thing too is it was only a short time before COVID, right? And so you didn't even know it was coming just yet. And it was
no, we knew that like the country was in the midst of COVID. It was starting to be a very difficult situation for us in the country. So like just throw into that the fact that yeah, like you now don't have a job, you don't have an income. Yeah, it's a scary time. And as you kind of already told everyone, yes, I am in my 40s. You know, I have 2 small children. I have 2 boys, 8 and 10. I have a wife, I have a mortgage, I have responsibilities, and that becomes even more stressful in that kind of microcosm of like going through a global pandemic and also having difficult financial personal situation.
Right. Well, listening to your podcast on TEDx was very inspiring. And there was something that you said there that says the odds are ever against us, but we push forward. In that circumstance, how did you push forward? I mean, good grief, you just lost your job in the middle of COVID. You can't really go and press the flesh and say, hey, in person. What were the first steps that you did in pushing forward, truly?
Yeah, it was pretty, as you can imagine, it was a pretty frightening time. It was pretty scary to think about what do you do next. But I guess fundamentally, I'd got this itch that needed scratching anyway, that was slightly probably more than an itch and actually a passion. You know, like 14 or 15 years ago, I was always really drawn to Amazon about the idea of this everything store and this really customer-centric business that really does show, you know, you as a shopper, everything that you want to see all in one place. But I guess somewhere over the course of history, it feels like that message has been diluted or lost its way somewhat a little bit. You know, it's very common if you look on Amazon right now, you see 75% of the products are like ads, right? Or you look for a brand, but you actually get shown a different one, or you get shown Amazon's own brand. That's really bad shopper experience. And I can kind of understand why the business drifted to that way, but it's kind of moved away from what were my core values in e-commerce that really first ever drew me to the company. And I see that happen elsewhere. You know, like Google, for example, and obviously we have sneaker selection, right? So, you know, if you look on Google right now for a green pair of Nike Air Force Ones, the odds are you're going to see a bunch of text ads that go to landing pages, duplicates of green Nike Air Force Ones, and a bunch of white ones, and then black ones, and then red ones. And, you know, and we basically live in a day and age, and even more relevant actually in these times, like, and it might sound a bit pithy, but, you know, we've, in less than a couple of years, invented a vaccine for a virus that we didn't even know existed, and 2 billionaires have just put themselves into space. And yet, if you want to go and buy yourself the best wireless headphones, or go and just buy a pair of sneakers in a size that fits you, you end up on a wild goose chase around the internet, opening up loads of different tabs on your browser. And it's just a waste of time and effort and energy that can take hours. And I don't get that. I don't see why that has to be the case. And so, yeah, it was slightly more than an itch. It was a chance to basically step into that passion and try and do something about it.
I love it. I love it. Well, the other thing though too is you mentioned another thing that you don't want to. Optimism is great, but so is being realistic. And at what point was it that what point was it that you made that realization, and what did you do about it? Hey, optimism is great, man, but it doesn't pay the bills.
yeah I think is it Scott Galloway quote something about that, like, don't follow your passion. That's basically the worst advice that you can have. If you just follow your passion, that can be very different from what you're actually good at. And so, yeah, there is absolutely like that raw optimism, but you have to be practical and you have to be realistic. And maybe my career has led me to the point that it did in March 2020 to say, well, actually, this is what I understand, intimately as a business and as a shopper behavior. And now, can I find the support around me to help me try and structure an actual business that's realistic, that's going to work. I'm 40 years old at the time. I've never run a business. I've never raised investment. I've never even had investor conversations. I didn't know what kind of legal docs I would need to do or set up a company. Like, how do you set all of that up? And it all just snowballed very, very quickly, because I was very lucky to have an excellent co-founder who, I know very well and trust very much, who is an expert in his space. And between the two of us, we just kind of had that moment of saying, hey, look, like, we're both similar age, similar life circumstances, like, and this has both happened to us. Like, what do we do? Like, should we do this? And so it really was no more than a couple of weeks later when we applied for a Virgin startup loan, which is a personal loan to get the business started, which is on slightly more favorable terms than many bank loans because it's tied to your business plan. And so we kind of squirreled ourselves away for a couple of weeks, applied for this loan, and all of a sudden I've got £25,000 that I've got to try and do something with. And that's the train started, right? Like, we're going down the tracks at that point.
Right. That is fantastic. And speaking of investors, first of all, I can't believe you were able to get it that fast. I mean, it's like pulling teeth sometimes over here. But you're vetting through a lot of the investors, and you had mentioned also that there were red flags that you weren't paying attention to. I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there, and they're hopeful for everybody to possibly give them some hope, albeit sometimes it's a false sense of hope. I'm wondering if you could share what some of those red flags are as you are looking for investors for an entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it's tough over in the US. I think if you're in the UK, you look at the US and see those big numbers of funding rounds and think it's a very different world over there. But I guess it's always feels a little bit different closer to home, right?
Yes.
Yeah, look, a year ago, I'd never raised any money for a business. I never spoke to investors. And so many of the mistakes that I made then, I look back on now somewhat cringeworthy. And I think it is balanced. It is because as a founder, you have to enter conversations with investors in the most positive way. Like, you have to be hopeful and optimistic. But the reality is as a pure numbers game, it's highly unlikely that that person that you're speaking to is going to invest in you. Just statistically, they won't. In fact, in the UK, about 1% of startups actually raise money, and about 4% of investor conversations actually manifest themselves in cash coming into the business. So when you kind of put that all together, you realize it's basically almost impossible to raise any money. But of course, it's not impossible. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. So it's not impossible, but you have to make sure that, and I was so guilty of this, those times where someone said, yeah, maybe, like, it's pretty good. And you go, oh, I think they'll invest. It's like, no, they're definitely a no. Like, in fact, most of the people that say yes, the moment that you put docs in front of them is probably a no. So anyone who's like maybe is no, or any of those questions that are there to kind of deflect that you kind of answer and you're like, yeah, well, I think that was a great question. No, it doesn't matter. They're not serious. And it's really, really tough to do that. And part of it's being a bit more comfortable in your own skin. I remember, with our background and our corporate background and our network and the fact that we're solving a big billion-dollar problem, we were courted by a lot of the early stage VCs fairly early on. And, really interesting to play back in my mind those conversations as someone who'd never spoke to a VC before. I would find myself like being asked what should be quite an easy question and then not being able to answer it very well. And so like the biggest shock that I think I felt, I remember someone saying, oh, so what do you do in the business? Like, what do you guys do in the business? Then we got us all on the call and what do you do? And what's really a very simple answer suddenly became like a really like garbled, don't really know this, that, the other, so justifying myself here, doesn't make any sense. And the reality is like he's probably the brains and I'm probably the mouth, and that's probably all you need to know for now.
I like it. I like it. And while you're going through all this, I'm looking at the rockets and such on your wall, the Legos and the Star Wars, and it's obviously you have some fun times with the kids and family. And just wondering if you can talk about what it was like for your family. It was a very fragile time, not a tender time, but how did they support you? What were some of the concerns that you had to negate? And what was the overall support system within the family?
Yeah, so it is interesting you pick up on the background. It is an interesting background that often gets commented on, which obviously people listen to podcasts unfortunately can't see. But this is the reality of building a business over the last 18 months completely remotely. I do have a remote office that I visit in London, and we're starting to open up a bit more in terms of meetings. But yeah, many of the times I've spoken to investors and they've decided to put cash into our business. I've not shook the hand. I've not looked them with the whites in the eyes and said, I got this. Like, it's all being conducted remotely whilst I'm basically sitting in a kid's playroom with a piano and my guitars behind me. And yeah, like the kids' Lego, or maybe the cat walks past, or something like that happens. And so, like building this business in that situation has both had its positives and it's both had its challenges. And again, my spirit is always to try and turn a negative into a positive. But having the kids around is great. Working from home, get to see a bit more of the kids, great. Not always great, by the way. Sometimes it's distraction or it's hard to manage, and that's the reality of it. Like, let's not sugarcoat that at all. It was fantastic that my wife was able to say, look, I'll support you, but look, give it 6 months basically, and if you're still not getting a salary, like, we've probably got a mortgage to worry about, right? Like, that was pretty unexpected, getting made redundant. Chase your dreams, and that's also the other thing that like founders I think always need to be wary of. Like, you have to be optimistic, you have to chase your dreams, but you have to know when you're chasing something that's just going to damage you elsewhere, and that's not healthy. And so you either need to find people to help fill that gaps, or find some support to help you, or just recognize maybe it's not the right time. And that's difficult to make. Obviously, I mean, speaking quite candidly, there are ebbs and flows when you run a startup, even as a startup as successful as we've been over the last 18 months, where there are times that you think that's really tough. Like, can I do this? Some of it's like really hard and you wonder whether you can do it, or really bad and you wonder whether you can get through it. And some of it's really good. Like, some of it's like, oh, wow, like I've got 20 people all working remotely distributed across the planet. That's really exciting. I can see how this can be 100 people in no time at all. And then it can be 500. And then at that point, I don't know, like, maybe should we have a conference somewhere? God, am I going to have to stand up in front of 500 people? Like, and tell them about what the vision's going to be or what we all expect? Like, that's pretty scary, right? Like, I don't, So there's good and bad all the time, and you continually challenge yourself. That's the reality. So I mean, it's fantastic to have friends and family around to support you to do that, but yeah, it's all a bit scary almost all the time.
Yeah. What struck me though is when you mentioned that in that short time, I mean, COVID's only been around for, it's going on 2 years, but the fact that you have 20 people now that are remote all across the world, growing that fast, you talk about incredibly successful in the short time period. Good night. You do have a lot of things to to
You know,
consider.
there's an awful lot going on around the world that you also don't realize. So, you know, we kind of share a common connection, and we talk about, sure, like building a business remotely in COVID, and many people listening will have been working from home or laid off, or been, like in the UK, they were furloughed, so their salary was paid for a length of time. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that's happened that's impacted people's lives. In some businesses, we've been lucky where, you know, like effectively working e-commerce, digital marketing, right? Like I can run that business anywhere on the planet. Whereas, sure, if you're in the hospitality industry, not so easy, right? So it's really, really challenging. But actually, outside of COVID, we've seen stuff from hiring a remote team that I just didn't even know existed, or did, right? But I mean, for example, we lost contact with our brand designer for a long weekend because he was caught up in the Black Lives Matter protests, which all kicked off in the US. We had a head of machine learning who had problems with power because there's a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and, you know, probably most people on the planet have never heard of those countries. Or the guy who was, you know, our head of UX design, he was in Belarus during the Belarus elections when the president basically got elected with like 105% of the vote. And like, you know, when there were protests about that, they cut off the internet for a week, right? So like all of this stuff is happening elsewhere on the planet whilst you're already still trying to build a business, when people are, you know, losing their jobs, people are dying, like all of this bad stuff is happening all across the world. And you know, you see how that affects the lives of all of our team as we grow, as we scale. And it's staggering, really.
Wow. It's interesting too. And Karch, I'm sorry if I was about to cut you off there, but you made it to where you put the human element on everything. So it's not just about building a company. You started out with making a difference, but it's obvious that you care very deeply about the people that work for you. And
oh, absolutely. Like we have to be a people first business, and we represented that when, so it seemed to, we can call it luck, we can call it judgment, like it's a bit of both. Like we hired a few people in India when we started, and our first initial hires were in India. And then we started to see more talent apply in India. And so we scaled up the Indian business. And India, obviously with the timings of COVID impact, countries were affected differently. We started to see that happen in India at a different time. And it was really important for us that, you know, rather than have basically a bunch of freelancers being paid in US dollars by a UK startup that really no one on the planet had ever heard of, that we would actually commit to that team. So yeah, like, believe it or not, we're actually a multinational corporation. I'm personally the director of Isle 3 India Private Limited. We have a subsidiary Indian business for the sole purpose of being able to protect our Indian team, pay them properly, pay local taxes, and have them fall under the local law and the local HR. And yeah, that's just what you have to have as a people first business.
wow, you just threw in a bunch of dynamics. I mean, the business that I'm in right now, even though it's a startup, the dynamics are nowhere near to what you were doing there. And I guess when you're looking at everything, there's that tendency to want to control everything. And matter of fact, you alluded to this too. How do you not take control of everything and let it be delegated? I know you've hired able people, but how do you shift from, oh my gosh, I need to control everything, to, I gotta trust people, man. I gotta.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I actually, I don't know that I've ever felt like completely the need to control everything. You know, I regularly hear people talk about how you should develop like you'll identify your weaknesses and then start to like get better at stuff that you're not very good at. And I mean, there's a really fatal flaw in that, which kind of just assumes that we've got an infinite amount of time, and like we don't. Life's too short, guys. Like we don't. And so if you are like 2 out of 10 at something, then the reality is wasting your efforts to try and go to 2 to 4 out of 10 is a waste. Like try and turn the stuff that you are like 7 or 8 out of 10 at, and make yourself a superstar. Find other people that help you fill those gaps. And surround yourself with people that will always lift you up despite your weaknesses. And I think, so I actually feel that, you know, for us as business, for me as an individual over the last year and a half, as we've built the business, that's kind of been like, you know, one of our kind of core kind of values. You know, like as a business, we have 6 key values for us. So really, we look for people to be very responsible, very curious, very proactive. So always looking to own solutions and try and find those solutions and try and disrupt the status quo. We look for people who are very persistent and pretty relentless in their pursuit. But also there's a couple of other things that maybe surprise people in terms of values. One of those is that, you know, it's really important to be appreciative, try and turn a negative into a positive, and recognize when actually something maybe didn't quite work, but it was the best someone could do, or it was the best scenario, or someone went out of their way to support you. And then also as well, another value which is really important for us is being vulnerable. And like at a human level, you have to be able to ask for help. You have to be able to surround yourself with people that will deliver that help. And then if they can kind of do that alongside the other values, with that attitude, with that proactiveness, taking ownership and responsibility, like probably stuff's going to work out in the end, and you're probably going to be okay.
Right. Oh my goodness, this is fun stuff to listen to your leadership theory, and also to just to see it in action, right? And
oh, it's really kind. It doesn't always, like I said, it doesn't always feel fun. And you know, most stuff that you see on social media is like unabounded success and pontificating about how great life is. But the reality is that everyone who's run a startup or worked in a startup probably sat on the sofa at some point in the time and had a little cry, or wondered, how can I do this? Like, is this too much for me? It's bad. Is this too much for me? It's good. What do I do next? Yeah, it's really, that's the bit that people don't see. And, you know, it's a bit like an iceberg, right? You know, you see the top of the iceberg, but actually most of what you see in any business, certainly in our business and any of our success, yeah, it is just a tip of an iceberg. You really don't see what happens behind the scenes almost all of the time. That is where the bulk of the work happens.
I love it. Well, another thing too is you are obviously one that really cherishes time. And I'm not just saying that not everyone appreciates it, but when you opened up the talk that I saw, you spoke about a time that you were held up at gunpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And that was years ago, but obviously, I mean, looking at your profile and such, you took great advantage of making time count. And I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about that experience, but also how it's impacted your life up to this point, but also in creating this company, because it seemed like a pivotal moment in your life that really influenced the way you do things.
Yeah, it did. And I actually don't think it was until I found myself in like a metaphorically similar situation at the start of lockdown that I actually realized how something that had happened 20 years beforehand actually impacted me. And so it's like having a gun to my head 20 years ago was that kind of heart-stopping, life in front of me kind of moment that like really shook me up. And by the way, like I'm sure there's probably loads of people listening that have had similar like experiences, by the way, right? Like it's way more common than it should ever be that that happens to someone, that they feel quite so existential. But I just remember someone saying to me afterwards, you know, you can let this really affect you. And like, no one would blame you. It's entirely reasonable for you to be really shaken up about this. But in a few years' time, it will be a really interesting story. And so really what that kind of put back to me was actually, you know, how do I take what's a difficult situation for anyone? And by the way, you're allowed to, like, if you have hardship or you have stuff that doesn't work out, like you're allowed to be upset about it. Like you're allowed to grieve, you're allowed to be in shock. But really what you have to try and do is recognize at what point do I cross over from this being a negative that I just can't get past, to try and turn it into a positive and move forwards. And maybe that advice kind of came back to me 20 years later to say, well, sure, like I guess I could find another job which I may or may not like. I guess I might not even find a job, and then I don't know, maybe I'm going to lose my home, and then gosh, like I don't think things are going to go too well with my wife if we're not living, like, you know, she's the only one bringing the money in, because, you know, I'm not really very good around the house, so it's just going to end badly there, right? And it's like, you know, like you suddenly enter that kind of like sliding doors moment of like your life kind of like sliding away from you. It just doesn't need to be like that. And so, yeah, maybe that kind of came back to me and recognized that, no, I think I need to kind of own this and take it forward. You know, I would say, like in parallel to this as a conversation, I am sick to death almost of listening to people who eulogize about failure being amazing, and oh, it's great to fail, and you know the sort of posts I mean that you see on like social media where it's like, oh, it's brilliant, like I failed and it was like great. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you could kind of shout about that without actually admitting that maybe you had a bit of a cry, maybe you had a bit of a panic attack, or maybe you suddenly thought, I've got no idea what I'm going to do about this, then it's not really the sort of failure that you want to be like shouting about coming through. Right. And that's the reality, like real failure, real toughness, real tough, hard times. It's okay to say that they're hard, and it's okay to be pretty scarred by them. Oh, yeah. But you do have to go forwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt your guys' groove because it's some excellent conversation. But one of the things I really appreciate about you, Thomas, is that you are very realistic. I think you're a realist.
Yeah.
And I think if we roll back to when you were working in those companies, what would you tell someone that's sitting in their cubicle this morning, staring at their computer, saying, I can do this better, or maybe I should branch out on my own? What would you tell that person, or if you could even go back knowing what you know now and talk to Thomas, you know, corporate Thomas, you know, working for someone else.
By the way, I love the way that you've called me a realist. It's the end of September, and my research into the UK investment market says that we have 180 weeks from now to create a unicorn business, and we think that we can do that. So I love that I've also got kind of called a realist within that. Look, I actually don't think it's that easy, by the way, like to be in a situation and think to take yourself out of that, start your own business. You know, founding our business was also in part driven by we're in. Like, it was the circumstance as well that was the catalyst. And so, you know, do I go back to myself in corporate life 10 years ago and think that guy can do what we can do now as a business? Like, no, like I couldn't. Like, I definitely couldn't, by the way. And I also didn't have the people around me that I'd built relationships with over years that that can help me now and can help us forward. So you know, I think a common theme that I hear is, you know, many people have an idea. In fact, loads of people have ideas. There's loads of ideas, but actually It's not about the ideas. It's about thinking about how you execute, how you set up something operationally. And I maybe liken that to something that's slightly more trivial. So I do fit the mold of a tech founder with, you know, a nice side parting and a beard. I've got a few bangles and I've got quite a few tattoos on my arms. So I am like pretty much a cookie cutter tech founder, at least in London anyway. And it still amazes me at 42 years old, how many people of a similar age who don't have any tattoos say, oh, I've always thought about getting a tattoo. Okay. Like, what stopped you? Like, it's been legal since you were 18, so you definitely had a chance to be, you know, we've had like 24 years to go and get a tattoo. You've never even thought of one that you wanted, that you might have accidentally regretted now and changed your mind. You've never even done that, like you never once. And so there is something about timing, and there is also something that is a difference in just getting on and doing something. Like doing something, like starting something. Like, I've got an idea, I'm going to kick it around for like 6 months or a year, don't really know. Okay, but like, you can incorporate a business in the UK in Companies House that costs you about 12 or 13 pounds. You could probably find yourself an accountant for a few £100, like, well, $500 a month, something like that, right? To run the books, and you can now go on to Shopify and make a website, like, for next to nothing, right? If that's what you want to do, right? Or you can go and wash cars down the road, doesn't matter, like, whatever. You can always do something if you really want to do it. So I guess, you know, like, corporate me would have never even thought about this. I've never been able to have got here because there's no way we would have had this business on our own. Like, we just wouldn't. But you have to move forward. You have to do something.
It seems to me like, if I had to boil down, this is very simplistic, but if I had to kind of boil down the things that made a difference for you, is, first of all, is relationships. Is even when you were working at your other jobs and career and that type of thing, is it sounds like you were always building those relationships, people, surrounding yourself with people that were positive, that were, you know, they had a strength where you had a weakness, or vice versa. But probably the biggest thing, it sounds like, is you would just jump into the deep end and go with it. You know, like, you're talking like your discussions with some of these venture capitalists, where at the beginning you felt like, I am completely blowing it and I have no idea what I'm saying right now. Mm-hmm. And then, but that's how you learn. You know what I mean? And it seems like there's a huge element of that for you. And it seems like a lot of the successful entrepreneurs that we know and that we've interviewed, that seems to be kind of a common theme, is being willing to say, I don't know, but I'm going to try, and then learn as I go. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly right. Like, I don't know, and so I'm going to find out. I don't know, and I think I know where I can go and find out, or who I can ask. Or I don't know, I'll give it a go and see how it works out, right? You know, sure. And that's the reality. You have to, and I guess that's why, you know, why we have, you know, being vulnerable as a leadership value within our business. You know, that's, you have to accept that you're going to make those mistakes and you're going to fail. And, you know, like, it's a toxic culture when that starts getting hidden. Right? Like, you have to just accept these things. You're going to be a garbled mess. You're going to stand up and do that pitch somewhere, and you probably do sound like the moron that you think you sound like, because, you know, sometimes you do and you get it wrong. I kind of liken it a bit to where, I don't know if you've ever heard of like the scenario where you've got like a one-way door and a two-way door in a decision-making process. And so there are times when, you know, you're going to go through that door and that's it, guys, like, decisions made, like, the door's locked behind you, like, the fire escape door, like, it's closed, you're not getting back in the building. And maybe you have to be a little bit more considered when you make those decisions. And you think about, am I the right person to have a crack at this? Or are we the right business? Or is this the right direction for us? But most of the time, in most decisions in business, in life, like, it's all right to kind of open the door and take a step in and then go, actually, I don't like this room. I'll close it. I'll come back. I'm all right. I don't quite fit in here. I don't think I'm going to do this.
But being willing, able to actually even peek in is
Yeah, like
is a great
open the door and walk into the party.
Yep. That I want to add to that. I love what you were mentioning, that there really are no norms of what an entrepreneur looks like. There's no, you don't have to be a young tech startup or whatever. It's a matter, anyone at any age in any job or occupation can start something if they're willing to take that. And furthermore, there's something that you had alluded to, and it was a fight strategy. Everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the face. And I remember Mike Tyson had said that, right?
Yeah, that's the Mike Tyson. It's a fantastic Mike Tyson quote. Exactly right. Yeah,
Yes.
he said exactly that. Yeah, right. You can plan what you want for me, but strategy is going to change, mate, when I punch you in the face.
But that's another thing that I'm noticing about you, and as well as many of our guests who have been successful entrepreneurs, is when that punch comes, they can adapt, they can adjust, and then they move, they stick and move. And that's something that, as I've listened to you and as I've been able to research many things on what you've done, that's exactly what you've been doing. And it seems like you continually do that. As the punches come, you adjust. And is that valid?
No, absolutely right. I think that's the reality, right? Again, this isn't just a business conversation. This is every aspect that you have. Like, we all have challenges all of the time. Some of those challenges are externally manifested or from something that's, feels like it's beyond your control, but what you can control is what happens within you and how you react to those. And you do have to, as you say, you have to keep moving forward. Right. And you have to try and see the positive, even though it is really, really hard to do that a lot of the time. Like, people don't just walk around like sunshine and rainbows with a big smile on their face, everything's happy. Like, everyone's got their own story and it's really tough. But again, I just can't stress enough, like I would never have, I've spoken to so many founders who have had very difficult year and a half. They've had difficult times beforehand, and they'll probably have difficult times going forwards as well, because statistically, again, the odds is that we should never have raised money. Most businesses don't raise money. We should never have raised money. We've raised 2 rounds and we've just opened a seed round now, and we're already a third of it full after less than a week. So, like, it's unheard of, right? But that's okay, because we've kind of got that both from being like pretty relentless and being supported by people, but also by being realistic.
Yes, I love it. I absolutely love it. One thing I know, man, you've given us a ton of time. I'm looking at how fast it keeps going.
We're still going, yeah. Okay. This is the part where we see like all of the kids come back and like homeworking doesn't sound like a good idea when all of that Lego behind me starts getting like rifled through or tipped over the floor, or the cat needs feeding around about now. Yeah, it's all very different. The life of a glamorous London-based CEO. I tell you, it was a real experience in lockdown in the UK when the kids, so our children were homeschooled for a large period of time, right, when they were sent back from the schools. And I was very thankful that my wife is way more patient and capable than me to be able to look after them without basically throttling them all. And I was able to do that really heroic dad thing of evacuating and trying to find myself somewhere quiet to work. And that was within a London office, a central London office at a hot desk, which unsurprisingly was about the very last place that anyone would go to, because, in a global pandemic, you probably find that the desk that you're sharing with 100 people is probably the safest place, because no one's going to go there. And it totally ruined my experience for offices, because there was a period of time where I had basically a private office that probably could have sat 350 people. I'm sure my personal office was bigger than Jeff Bezos's or Elon Musk's for a period of time. I don't think I'll ever get back to that again.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, just to close up here, is this statement you made: chaos for the fly is calm for the spider. And when I think of that, it just struck me because it could be nuts all over the place, but for someone else, there's always going to be that calm. And listening to your story, we make that calm by attacking the things that we believe in and the things that we'd like to pursue. And I want to thank you for all the different lessons that you just taught and for what you continue to do. It's truly inspiring. And I'm looking at Carson over here on the other screen, and he's just shaking his head.
guys, it's nothing. There's no secret sauce. It's just life. And yeah, that's a great quote. That's a great perception. And I think life's about perspectives, right? And I guess that's one of the things that I kind of, as I'm older and hopefully a little bit more wiser, start to realize what I learned when that gun was held to me. Like, you're looking at down a barrel of a gun, and there's two things that you can look at. They're like, you're either going to die, or might not even have any bullets in it, mate. You're fine. It's all right. It's just a threat. Like, move on. Like, think about where you are in a situation, and that's the kind of reality of it. Like, whenever you find yourself in a difficult situation, whenever we make decisions to say maybe move the business forward, or with the team, looking after our people, with investors, with growing business, like anything to do with that, there is always another perspective. And if you're not capable of looking at the other perspective, because sometimes you're emotionally clouded, you're too close to the situation, it's too difficult to, or whatever, it's like an unknown, then just make sure that you've got other people with a different perspective that can help you realize what that is. And then it's a much stronger position to move forward from.
Fantastic.
That is wise advice. Wise advice.
Truly. Thomas, we appreciate your time. I know it's precious, especially running that company. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me. You're right. Time is pretty tough. That's what happens when you're in the middle of yet another funding round within 12 months. It is pretty tough, but it's lovely to have a conversation away from, yes, like a usual pitch to hundreds of investors over and over again. Sooner that we can launch and start shouting and about the business in Q4 and actually delivering value for shoppers, the better it will be, and the happier I'll be, for sure.
Well, all the best to you, and we look forward to more stuff from you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Thomas.
Take care.